And here we have Al Gore in An Inconvenient Truth. And we're going to look at just a few of the fantastically interesting errors in his film. He says there is one relationship that's more powerful than all the others, and it is this: when there's more carbon dioxide, the temperature gets warmer because it traps more heat from the sun inside. And what he's trying to do there is to suggest that in the former climate, when we weren't adding much CO2 to the atmosphere, it was the CO2 that was changing, and that was causing the changes of temperature that led to the beginning and ending of the ice ages. That's the order of precedence which he gives. It is almost unanimous in the scientific peer-reviewed literature that that is not the case. Here is Pettit et al., 1999. Here's CO2 concentration and here's temperature. They appear to track very nicely together. But if you look at them closely enough, it is actually the temperature that changes first by somewhere between 800 and 2,800 years, depending on which paper you read, and the CO2 which follows. Let's go on to the next one. Now, one of the problems we've seen is that correlation doesn't always imply causation, and it didn't in Gore's case, because here we've got sunspot number along the bottom and the number of Republican senators in the US Senate. There's a beautiful correlation there. I think you'll have to accept that I have now, actually it was Douglas Keenan, a friend of mine, who has identified a really important climatic result. So moving on then, we're now going to look at some other errors. Here's another one. We have seen in the last couple of years a lot of big hurricanes, and then, of course, came Katrina. Pictures of Katrina smashing up poor New Orleans. Heart-rending stuff. It was only Category 3 when it did so, but it still did the most terrible damage. And let's see whether that's got anything to do with hurricanes. Now, look at this. There has actually been no increase in the number of Atlantic hurricanes that make landfall throughout the entire past century. Simply unchanged. Let's go on and look at a few more of these errors. Here's number 3. Japan didn't get as much attention in our news media, but they set an all-time record for typhoons. Oh, no, they didn't. Here it is, typhoons, and just in case that isn't enough, here are the cyclones as well. Downtrend. Let's have the next one. There had been warnings that hurricanes would get stronger. Oh, had there? Yes, there had, actually. There are 1 or 2 people who said so. And, oh, boy, look at this graph. The trend is definitely upwards. Absolute catastrophe. But now let's show, that's part of the story, let's show the whole story. And, oh, yes, if they'd gone back to a different start date, remember this start date dodge? We've seen it before with the IPCC. Now we see it here. No trend. So now let's have another error. The insurance industry, recovered losses are going up. See the damage from these severe weather events. Oh, yes, look at it. Unadjusted losses at money prices. Here we go. Oh, yes, absolutely ghastly, 2005. Bad, increase, shocking. Oh, dear, now we've adjusted it for today's prices and the fact that more people are living in harm's way than were before. The next error, there's a faster build-up of the heat here at the North Pole in the Arctic Ocean and the Arctic generally than anywhere else on the planet. Yes, it is true, if you stick to that sentence on its own, that most of the increase in temperature tends to be in northern latitudes. This is predicted, again, for perfectly good reasons. If you get any kind of warming, it is not a signature effect of anthropogenic warming. But we have a problem here because in 1940 it was clearly quite a lot warmer in the Arctic than it is today. So, these are something which your newspapers wouldn't have shown you. Icebound vessels all over the Arctic in April of this year. Arctic climate is highly variable. You'll get the Independent reporting as it did last week. 22 degrees Celsius record temperatures in the Arctic. What they mean record is record in just the last 30 years. We know perfectly well that Amundsen in a sailing ship was able to sail through the Northwest Passage in 1903. Next error. A new scientific study shows that for the first time they're finding polar bears that have actually drowned, swimming long distances of up to 60 miles to find the ice. Enough to make anyone's heart bleed. But what's the truth? That study he was referring to was by Monod and Gleason, 2005 and 2006. 4 dead polar bears. That's what that entire thing is based on. And how did they die? What do Monod and Gleason tell us about how they died? They said it was because there was exceptionally high sea states and very high winds and the poor critters were swamped. Shit happens, and it did. And here is the gentleman himself. Quite a smart suit. And he says that West Antarctica is considered relatively more stable than another big body of ice that is roughly the same size, Greenland. The huge Greenland ice sheet. Come on, let's see what we've got here. The Greenland ice, oh dear, it hasn't been getting thinner after all. It's been growing at 2 inches a year for a period of a whole decade. That's 20 extra inches across several 100,000 square miles of ice. And now this is another error by Gore. He says that in the last 30 years, global warming has caused the snows of Kilimanjaro to disappear. The romance of it, the terror of it. No more of Hemingway's stories. The snows of Kilimanjaro are disappearing. But monthly mean air temperatures only vary slightly around the annual mean of minus 7.1 degrees Celsius. Has anyone tried to melt water at minus 7.1 degrees Celsius? If you try to melt ice at that, you can't do it. Temperatures never rise above the freezing point. No, they don't. The nearest they get to it is minus 1.6 Celsius. Molg et al., 2003, one of a series of papers which show quite clearly that the melting of Kilimanjaro has got absolutely nothing to do with global warming because it isn't warming up there. Onwards. The ice has a story to tell, and it is worldwide. Let's see. Aha. 1820. The deglaciation of the glaciers began, and it has continued on a more or less linear trend since then, and we didn't really begin to have much effect on the climate until around the late 1940s. The rate has been absolutely uniform throughout, so it's got very little, probably nothing to do with us. Next one. Lake Chad, oh yes, these lakes, Lake Chad fading away, but unfortunately the record, Cohen-Foley, shows that it's nothing to do with us. In 4000 BC the lake was huge, today it's much smaller. The average depth is only 10 foot. It's been dry, totally dry before in 8,500, 5,500, 2,100 BC, and over-extraction by changing local practices and growth in population is what has caused the decline in Lake Chad. Foley and co. say so. Now, oh yes, then we have the Sahara. Unbelievable tragedies because of this spread of the Sahara Desert. No. Let's go on. There you are. The Sahara has recently lost 300,000 square kilometres to vegetation. The precise opposite of what Gore tells you is the fact. Next one. I want to focus on West Antarctica. They've measured disturbing changes on the underside of this ice sheet. So let's go. Problem. The disturbing changes seem to have been caused by thickening ice. Gore error 17. The citizens of these Pacific nations, this one is Tuvalu, the Maldives, you know them all, Carteret Islands, all had to evacuate to New Zealand. None of these nations has evacuated to New Zealand. I've checked with the New Zealand High Commission. It's just not true. And here, sea level rise. What sea level rise? This is Kandahar 2005. Johnston Island, no sea level rise for 50 years. Down to Saipan, none for 22 years. No sea level rises. On problem. Besides, corals can grow at 10 times the rate that sea level is even predicted to rise. So there's no reason why any of these islands should disappear, and no need for any of the citizens to go to New Zealand or anywhere else. Next slide. Ah, yes, mosquitoes. There are cities that were founded because they were just above the mosquito line. Nairobi is one. Nairobi was not founded because it was above the mosquito line. It was founded because it was a pre-existing Kikuyu watering hole on the Kikuyu escarpment on the railway known as the Lunatics Line between Mombasa and Dar es Salaam. That was why Nairobi was built where it was. It's nothing whatever to do with global warming. Next slide. Now this is the biggie. This is the one that everybody gets most scared about. The city of Santa Barbara has decided to paint a line through the entire county showing where the 20-foot level rise would come when sea level, which it imminently expects to rise, will reach that level. Why does it think that? Because Al Gore has said so. The St. Albert has pronounced. And behold, sea level will rise 20 feet. Oh dear, no it won't. Because the second assessment report says maybe 3 feet. Third assessment report, 2 feet 11. Fourth assessment report, 1 foot 10. But maybe if we have a more realistic level of population, 1 foot 5. So there's the worst exaggeration in the film, and arguably the worst and most serious in this entire debate. I could have shown you, we haven't time, another 14 or 15 errors, equally bad, but that is how astonishingly inaccurate this particular film is. Now, here's one of the problems. Whatever damage we might have been conceived to have done to the climate by putting CO2 in it, China is now the one to watch.